So we have been with management topics and how do we get management understanding us and understanding us, each other. Now politics. It's actually my job. I actually love it. And half the world claims to have invented democracy. Donald Trump defends democracy with a zealous hunger. And he wants to bring it everywhere, and he doesn't do it. And the Germans have invented democracy. The Germans, they elected Adolf Hitler. And we have so many democracies that actually simply failed. The only country that really may claim to have invented something like democracy is ancient Greece, with the first constitution ever having been written where? Who thinks in Athens? Why? It's because it was Sparta. The warriors wrote the first constitution ever. And Athens invented democracy. And in my view, that's why I get on that long, the only country that is a real democracy that actually deserves the name is Switzerland. Because we... Hey, I got a representative of our administration laughing. That was an achievement. Because we do not vote once every 4 years. We vote 4 times a year. That is a difference. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm definitely not going to talk about politics. It's not about politics. We're not trying to reinvent anything. We're just trying to add a new voting channel. We already have 2. We can vote at the ballot box. We can vote by mail. And now, slowly, it is also getting possible to vote online. So, first of all, thank you very much for letting me speak at Cyberstorm. It's a great honor and a great pleasure. And it does make sense to speak about it here, because if trust is important somewhere, then it is important in voting. And if you add computers to it, you reach e-voting. So the fusion is clear, trust in e-voting. So first of all, I've had some talks with participants here, and many are interested in why do you want to introduce e-voting and who is responsible of what. There's a lot of things to say, but I cannot really cover this whole subject. I really want to go into the trust issue and make some points that are really important to me and show you what, in my view, is the foundation of why somebody could choose to trust in e-voting. But nevertheless, a short view on the landscape of Switzerland. You see many colors here, which is quite normal in Switzerland because we have our 26 cantons. And also when it comes to e-voting, every canton does it in a different way. So it's normal that the cantons are in charge of everything that has to do with votes and elections on the operational level, and that also accounts for e-voting. So the green cantons, they use the system provided by the Canton of Geneva to perform e-voting, to offer e-voting, and the blue cantons use the system of Swiss Post. And it also depends in which canton you live. Even if e-voting is offered, then there's a big chance that you're not going to benefit from it unless you're a Swiss abroad. In some cantons, you can also benefit when you're a resident. So where does the Federal Chancellery come in? I work for the Federal Chancellery, and it's our job to make sure the legal base is in place. Particularly, we have a technical framework that with a lot of requirements that have to be met by the cantons and the operators in order for them to introduce e-voting. What we also do is we coordinate between the cantons. We try to elaborate best practices and make sure these are spread in a reasonable way. Just a little teaser. All of this information that I'm giving you today, by the way, you can also find on our website below as a little teaser. These are some statistical numbers of the September vote, where you can see find information on the participation, but other project information generally you can find on our website regarding the history of e-voting. And what you will also find, which is an important message in my view, is the fact that e-voting is a long journey in Switzerland. It has been a long journey, and it will remain to be a journey. So the first trials have taken place 15 years ago, and by trial we mean binding trials. So already 15 years ago, the first e-voters have cast their e-votes, and those votes were counted in a binding way. And nevertheless, even though this is already 15 years ago, never more than 4% of the overall Swiss electorate was allowed to vote online. And that has to do with the security-first approach that the Confederation and the cantons are committed to. So in return to security requirements being fulfilled, the electorate can be increased. So far we have reached 3.8% of the electorate in this overall setting. So now let's shift to trust in general. So in voting, what is important when it comes to trust? Definitely I'm not sure which one is most important, but definitely a very important thing is that the people trust in the result reflecting the voters' intentions, right? I mean, if you have doubts that not the intentions of the voters are reflected in the trust, then it will be very hard to convince the people that the vote actually has made sense, especially the losers might refuse to accept the result of the vote. And obviously also the secrecy of the vote has to be respected. And the people have to trust in that, and they usually do in Switzerland. There's a lot of trust in Switzerland regarding these things, even if you're not there as an observer. So where do you get this trust from? Kind of you have to imagine that there are probably people involved there who are willing and able to define appropriate procedures and living up to them at the best of their abilities. So when you want to figure out if you should trust such a setting, then you have to have an idea of what it might look like behind the scenes. So I picked out this picture here, which does not represent how it looks like always at every stage, that's for sure. This is really an ideal picture, but when people look into e-voting, they tend to compare it with the ideal world, and the ideal world might look something like this. So I'm sure we can analyze this in many different ways, on psychological levels and in many ways, but I want to be a little bit more formal about this since this is a security conference. So first of all, what we can observe is that the people, they have the votes on the table, so they're visible, they can check them with their own eyes, but they can also check on the other people how they are handling the votes. So I would claim that it would be reasonable to believe to trust in the overall procedure if you trust at least one person in his will and his ability to detect fraud, and if he detects it, to escalate it to the people who are in charge over there. So this is a claim that I want to put in the room, that it is a good reason to trust in such a procedure when you trust in one of these people in being willed and able to perform correctly. So when we look into e-voting, this is still the thing that we want to keep in mind, but it's really not that obvious how you can get a feeling for having a view behind the scenes, because many people, when they think about e-voting, they imagine such a setting with a big computer on the table, right? So if you imagine such a setting with a big computer on the table, then it becomes much less obvious how these people can actually be enabled to detect fraud. Their will is still there. People still believe that these people are very willed, but if they have a computer on the table, the votes are going to be invisible and they can't really see which software is running on them. Even if you have published the source code, you won't really be able to check if that source code is really running on the computer. So due to reflections like this, you have to think about other ways, or maybe you're thinking about how is it possible that you can make such a procedure trustworthy, and many people have done so. And when you look around the media, you get a lot of reflections like this, which I don't want to trivialize. When I started thinking about e-voting, I had pretty much the same thoughts. So the first bullet I already mentioned, so transparency is inherently impossible because the votes are invisible. Then others might say, okay, the votes are inside computers, so probably some kind of computer people who know these computers, they might open them up and they might get some kind of sense out of it. And the term verifiability, which I would like to speak about later, is often misunderstood in that sense, that some experts, cyber experts, are able to look into the computer because the computers are verifiable, but that's not what we're looking for. Then another argument that is very makes a lot of sense, right? When you think about it, is that if you have a person in charge who is who needs to determine if a vote has to be counted, right? If the voter who cast the vote is actually an eligible voter, then there is some connection to the identity of this person. So the person will somehow be able to trace back to the identity of that person. And if we imagine that the same trustee who is in charge of making sure that this vote doesn't get changed up until the counting stage, then he will have the full chain that it takes in order to break the secrecy of the vote. On the other hand, if the secrecy of the vote should be spared, then obviously this person in charge of making sure everything is going correct is not allowed to look at something. So it really seems mutually exclusive, and it's not obvious how you can solve these problems. Then also something that we've heard a lot is that e-voting is problematic because you can make no meaningful recounts, right? If you believe that there might be something wrong about the result, of course it doesn't make sense to click enter over again on a computer because it's a deterministic machine, and of course the result will always be the same. So when you think about e-voting from that perspective, it is really hard to believe how you can make it possible, and people often conclude that the administrations will anyway fail, even if there are some smart ways of doing it. So the message that I want to bring here is that over this journey of 15 years, the administrations have thought about these things too, right? 15 years is a long time, and we have been working with academia and a lot of people who've spent a lot in defining and developing secure e-voting systems, and we are able to address these issues. I'm not saying that everybody has to like the way we address it, but the way we address it has to be taken into the equation when you think about if you want to trust e-voting or not. And this is pretty much the thing that I want to talk about today is verifiability. There has to be some kind of control about what is going on with the votes, and you have to break this gap between the seeming mutually exclusiveness between transparency and secrecy. So before I go into voting, I would like to make a really trivial example just to demonstrate that you can check if a computer has done everything right without being a computer scientist. And this is something that many people don't really see when they start thinking about e-voting. So imagine I'm in a restaurant and I just got my restaurant bill, and it seems to me that I was charged way too much, right? So which would mean that I somehow don't trust the people who generated that bill, and I don't trust the computer that generated the bill. So in such a case, I would not go and check the source code of the computer and make sure that the program has been running correctly. In such a case, I would go through the bill, check on the individual items, and sum up all the positions once I verified that they're all correct, and do the calculation again. I would just simply do a recount of all these positions and make sure that the sum that is under the line really reflects the positions that I ordered. And if I'm not sure if I did the counting correctly, I can do it again. It's a meaningful recount, because if I do a mistake once, I might not do it a second time. If I don't think that I'm able to do the summing up correctly, I can still give the bill to other people and they will do that recount for me. It's a simple example how you can make sure that a computer actually performed correctly. So now the next example. This time I'm getting the receipt by a signed email, let's suppose, and I have the same problem. But this time I have many more positions, so too many that I would want to sum up in my head. So this time, what might I do, right? I will still not want to check the source code of the original computer because I'm not going to know if that's the source code running on it. But I would use my own computer, maybe do a copy-paste into a spreadsheet, and have my software on my computer recalculate the sum. So if in such a setting I get more trust into the bill, then that's a really natural thing happening. It's not like I'm cheating myself if I'm gaining trust, right? Of course, it can happen that the same malware that was running on the computer that generated the bill is also collaborating with the malware on my computer. I cannot exclude that, but I know that this is quite unlikely to happen. So if I gain trust in such a setting, I'm not cheating myself. This is a valid form of verifying something. If I do believe that I have a malware on my computer, then I can still transfer the bill to other computers with different operating systems, with different hardware chips, for example, and make sure that the recount is done in an independent way. and possibly also performed by other people when it comes to voting. And this is kind of my first conclusion. So if voting were only to be about summing up the votes, then I would claim that the summing up the votes is verifiable in the sense that you can use different equipment. I can do it once, I get some trust. If I'm not sure if the trust is good enough, I can always do the recount with different equipment or have different people doing it. So if we imagine that an electoral commission is in charge of verifying that everything has been running correctly, this electoral commission will not have an idea how spreadsheet software works. They will have no clue about how Excel works. But they will know where their software is coming from that does the recount. They will know that this software is coming maybe from academia, maybe from different programmers, but they will get a sense, they will definitely get a sense for the independence of their recount, independence from the original system, and based on that, they can build their trust. So, verifiability, I'm sorry, I have to take a sip of water because I'm talking a bit faster than usual, maybe that's the reason. Anyway, verifiability is not just about summing up the votes, that's for sure. You want to have control of the full process. And in the e-voting literature, by the way, this is a scientific field, especially where cryptographers get involved. So the full chain is often described as the possibility to verify that your vote has been cast as intended, recorded as cast, and tallied as recorded. So when you have that full chain of verifiability, then you have reasons to be happy. So let's begin with you being able to verify that your vote has been cast as intended. So what is really special about Switzerland, and especially in different countries, when I mentioned that we have e-voting in Switzerland, they would imagine something completely without paper, right? You have some kind of token at home, and then you just cast your vote without using paper. However, in Switzerland, we still do have the paper, and that's the voting card that many of you know. You can use that voting card for voting at the ballot station, or for voting by mail, which, by the way, 95% of the Swiss do. They vote by mail. They go to the mailbox and cast their vote. And with e-voting, you can use the same voting card also to cast a vote online. And this is something that I like very much security-wise, because it allows you don't have to trust your computer in every sense when you use this voting card. And why is that so? Your voting card, after you authenticate using a code on the voting card, you also have return codes on this voting card. And I'm not going into the detail. When you want to cast a vote yourself and look how this works, you can use the URL down below of the Swiss Post system, and that's really a reconstruction of the actual original system. But anyway, at some stage, you will get a code that is displayed on your screen, which tells you that your vote has been cast as intended. And if that code on the screen matches the code on the paper, which is distinct per voter and per answer. So if I want to vote a yes, then I'm going to know which code I'm looking for on the screen. And if these codes match, then I know that my vote has been cast as intended. So now, where does trust come in? What does it mean if my vote has been cast as intended? This could mean many things. It just left my computer. It might have gone to a man in the middle. What does it mean, a vote to be cast as intended? And this is where the trustees come in again, right? We want to be able to trust the procedure if it is enough to trust only one of a group of people. So where is my vote actually going? The encrypted vote is symbolized here, well, the encryption is symbolized by the purple circle, and the return code being generated is symbolized by the black arrow going down. So what is happening here is that the return code will only be correct if all of these 4 trustees you see on the right side are participating at generating their element of the return code. So what a correct code basically tells me is that my vote has reached 4 different trustees. This is something we don't have on paper mail. On paper voting, we just put it in the mailbox and it's gone. But this code actually tells me that the vote reached 4 individual trustees with individual operating systems. These are also different operating systems and different hardware. So when I talk about these things to people, many say, look, I really like this thinking. It's important to give the voters a good feeling, right? The voters will like it having the same code on the screen and as they have on the voting card. But what if somebody still doesn't trust that. What if you have a man in the middle who will show you the correct code that you expect, but even though the vote has not reached these 4 trustees? And there the answer is cryptography. It's just not possible to generate a correct return code without the participation of all of these 4 trustees. This is where cryptography comes in. And of course, you have to trust cryptography in all of these schemes. And you have to trust in one of these trustees, of these 4 trustees, being performing well, having the will and the ability to perform well, and also performing well. So after all the votes have been cast, all of these 4 trustees will be able to confirm that all of the votes, here we only have 3 votes, in the ballot box are actually the votes that they received at the vote casting stage. So they will be able to confirm that these votes are the ones that they generated return codes for. So as long as one of these 4 trustees is trustworthy, willing and able to perform correctly, and if all of them are consistent, then you have a good indication that these votes have not been manipulated until the stage of tallying. So what happens at tallying? When we talk about tallying, you will imagine some kind of private key that somehow comes in that makes sure that the votes can be decrypted before they're counted. This is something we don't want, because if there were this kind of key, then one person or one device would have that kind of key, and that key could be misused to decrypt the votes. And these votes might still be somehow linked to the voters, right? The systems are designed in a way that the names, the identities are not directly linked, but the IP addresses might be recorded, or maybe the order of the votes, how they were coming in. So you don't want these votes to be decrypted in the state as they are in the ballot box in this order. So what do we do instead? We want to have a procedure, an active procedure that gives us a feeling for the degree or the trustworthiness of the secrecy of the vote being enforced. So how is this being done? For that, you take one trustee and his equipment, and what he does is he performs cryptographic mixing. So he takes every vote out of the ballot box, he puts it at a random position at the right, and he changes the encryption. And at doing that, he is not able to decrypt the vote, and he doesn't have to decrypt the vote. So what happens now if I were to get the ballot box with all of the votes? Let's imagine I know the voter identities and I get the result of this mixing. Then I would not be able to decide which vote on the right correlates with which vote on the left. Now here you might say you have to rely on one trustee, on the trustworthiness of one trustee, because if he tells you in which order he put the votes in the output, then you would still be able to make that kind of correlation. And this is what we don't want, and that's why we do the mixing over and over again until it has been done 4 times. So now we can say that if you want to think about whether the secrecy of the vote has been enforced, then it's enough to think about whether you trust one of these trustees with his equipment that is distinct from the other equipment having performed correctly. So once these votes have been detached from the identities of the voters, again, we have 4 trustees who are in charge of decrypting the votes. Obviously, we want this distribution among 4 trustees to make sure that they cannot decrypt the votes earlier. And at some point, they will decrypt the votes, and then you have the votes at the right, of which the summing up is verifiable. So now a lot of things have happened to the votes. We had this mixing, we had the decryption, and now this slide just summarizes everything I showed you before. So you have various steps of mixing the votes, in the end the decryption, and you want to be sure that you're able to verify that. So cryptography allows you to check whether the sum of the votes is equal to the sum on the right, sum of the votes on the right. And these kind of cryptographic proofs can be checked over and over again, just like the sum I had in the restaurant example. So everything that is happening here, you can verify based on cryptographic proofs, also the decryption of the vote. So if somebody would say that the green vote is actually would not have decrypted to a yes, but to a no, then you can prove that using a cryptographic proof. And this is how you can verify the full chain having been performed correctly. And just like with the restaurant bill, this verification can be done over and over again by different people with different equipment. So the ordinance of the Federal Chancery, which is the the technical framework, what we ask to be done by the cantons and the operators is to make sure that voters or observers need to be able to detect fraud at any time, whereas it is allowed to assume that 1 out of 4 trustees is behaving correctly. And obviously the printing office that prints these codes also has to be assumed to perform correctly, right? These codes, they should not leak, otherwise this cast as intended verifiability doesn't work. And that's why we also have special requirements for these printing offices that have to be fulfilled. So now I showed you the concept of verifiability. So the idea is that we want to relate this image that we had in the beginning, where you have this group of trustees, to a world where you have a group of trustees with their individual equipment. But how would you know that this framework is actually put in place? So I already said you have to trust in the crypto. You have to trust in the crypto protocol that is defined for this kind of voting procedure, and to get good evidence that this crypto protocol actually matches the requirements that I was pointing out before. There have to be mathematical proofs done by the academia that are also checked by the academia, and these protocols are also put online, so everybody can look at these results. Certification is, in the more formal sense, this is also an issue with regard also to verifiability. First said that certification bodies, they have to be accredited by the Swiss Accreditation Service, and not just in the sense of being a good certification body, but also in the sense of actually knowing their way around with e-voting technology. So if I were a certification body and I want to make money by certifying e-voting, I would have to go to the accreditation service, show that I'm good at ISO 27001, and also in its application regarding e-voting. So there's a software audit that has to be performed. When it's about the trustees' equipment, then it's on a EAL4 level by Common Criteria Standards, EAL2 otherwise. And of course, even if the software is certified, you don't know that this is the software that is running, but just a good software being available adds to the ability of the trustees to perform in a correct way. Then within the ISO 27000 standard with regard to verifiability, you might imagine that it is being looked into whether the trustees are willing and able to protect their equipment in a reasonable way, whereas also many e-voting reflections come into the game, right? So keys needing to be changed before every voting event and things like that. Also on the organizational level, as I said, e-voting is a journey. It has been a journey and it will go on. So in ISO 27, you also make sure that you have a reasonable ISMS that makes sure that you have a process that allows for continuous risk evaluation and improvement, and also checking whether there are better solutions that could be implemented. Then the last bullet on this slide is source code publication. This is also part of the regulation. This, without the source code publication and all of these things that I mentioned now being fulfilled, it will not be allowed to introduce e-voting on a large scale. So the first source code being published will be the one of the Swiss Post system. This should happen in the first quarter of 2019, so very soon. Yeah, whoever of you wants to wonder if they should trust e-voting or not, then I am asking you to think about these principles, these concepts, and you can also look into the source code. But just don't believe that we think that a good source code is the reason why you should trust e-voting. This is an auxiliary instrument, having a good source code. The most important thing is having verifiability. One more thing I'd like to mention is that the Confederation and the cantons have decided that a public intrusion test should take place. So the whole world will be invited to hack our systems. And the first system that will be hackable is the system of the Swiss Post again, and that will take place according to their planning in the first quarter of 2019. So anybody who wants to participate or spread the message, then please go ahead. So as a conclusion, when people ask or people wonder whether they should trust e-voting, they might look at the media, they might talk to people. people might say, look, our systems are certified. This is an argument that I've heard also in other contexts, that this is a good reason why you should trust e-voting. I would say no. The question is, what is being certified? And what is being certified in Switzerland is the verifiability concept that relates directly to what people like to see, even though it's not really there always, but what they have in their imagination when they think of a trustworthy procedure. So when you want to think about whether you should trust e-voting, please look into verifiability, and if you want to talk to us about it, then do so. But please relate it to the documentation that we have on our websites and that describe these kind of things around verifiability. So thank you very much.
I'm sure you have questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the speech. I use and vote e-voting with great success, but this is only half e-voting because I still rely on receiving a paper card in my mailbox, so I cannot, it's not completely electronic.
That's true, yes. That's true. And you don't like that. You want it to be fully electronic.
Yeah, is there any plan to change that so it will be truly an electronic vote?
Well, how should I say? This is not a top priority right now. There have been these ideas around for many years. What is a good reason against it is the trustworthiness of the overall system. The paper system that we have right now, this really allows us to have a trustworthy way for the people to check whether their vote has been cast as intended. So if you imagine that this paper goes away, then you can do two things. Either you rely on the computers that you have at home, so you might imagine that you get some kind of a feedback on your computer that you don't trust, and then you check that feedback on another computer, and you can do it as often as you want, just as I explained it for the trustees. But this is something that the people won't do. They will simply be too lazy for that. So that's not really a vision that we can look into. So we had a speech about trusted hardware 2 speeches ago. This might be, let's say, a necessary condition for to have such a solution, but there are still very many questions open there. So first of all, such a hardware would need to be trusted in the first place. You would have to have a certain control that you don't have a single point of failure there, because once they're distributed, they're just around. You cannot just, if you have a problem in there, you can't just take it back and change it. So there are many questions there. And in short, the answer is in the next years, then you cannot expect it.
Thank you.
I had one question down there.
How do you verify that the verification codes on the paper you receive are not swapped or correct? Like, how do you verify the generation of the paper that I get per mail?
Okay. So the codes are generated also using these trustees in the back end, and the data that they produce, they're going to the printing station, and they keep the data, the original data, as a commitment that can also be verified by the Electoral Commission in the end. So swapping, so you can make sure if you swap the codes just on the paper, then you will get wrong codes from the system, and this is something that would be noticed. So swapping is only fun when you can also corrupt the trustees at the same time.
So I imagine that there will be phishing sites and other malicious actors to influence the outcome of the vote. So now that I'm a voter and I have this card and I see that the code isn't correct, so what is now the process to actually contest my single vote? I mean, is this like one click online somewhere else, or how is this then done?
Okay, phishing sites, it's quite possible that this is something that will happen, and that's also another reason why I like the voting card being sent on paper. So I think it's wrong to assume that the people aren't smart enough to stick to the procedure that is described in the voting material. So we do rely on the people understanding the process, and we have to teach them in some way. So if you have a phishing site that tells you to enter the return code, then of course somehow the wrong return code, the correct return code can be shown to you and you can be cheated, that's for sure. And to your second question about contesting, if the wrong code is shown to you, then you can still vote by mail. Okay. That's also a very important feature. Yeah.
I'm afraid I have to call the end because we have like 1 hour lunch. It started like 3 minutes ago, and I know this discussion is going to go on and on and on and on forever and a year. I know that. Please enjoy your lunchtime for 1 hour and be welcome back in an hour.